We recently spoke to Alison Federka of Geopolitical Futures about the world and her specialty, South America. And just days, hours after our discussion, to the polls went the people of Chile to discuss and determine the future of their country. Which direction is it going to be heading? They did a poll. What did they do, Jeff? Actually, I guess I should introduce you, Jeff Snider, head of global research. They went to the polls for a constitutional assembly. I love it. I wish we would have a constitutional assembly, but that's just me sometimes. I'm upset with the way the United States is going sometimes. Go ahead, Jeff. What happened in Chile?
Well, exactly what you said. They went to the polls for a constitutional, sort of a referendum to elect seats to a special body, which would be empowered to rewrite the Chilean constitution. And I think it is Chile, although I think most Americans, we say Chile because that's what we're naturally. So we don't want to offend any Chileans with our Americanization of their country's name, which I think is Chile rather than Chile.
I've been to Chile a few times, several times. I love it. That's fantastic. I can't wait to go back. The north, the Atacama Desert, driest desert in the world. It looks like Mars. It's unbelievable. It doesn't rain there. It just doesn't rain. And then you go south and you're in the glaciers and you're in this incredible, rich, green forested place. And in the middle, beautiful, wonderful food, wine country. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about that you say that there's one ironclad rule, if there was one, when it comes to political economy, which is what we discussed with Alison Federka, and that is that there's an inverse relationship between economic expansion and political stability. Tell us about it, and then tell us what the proximate cause was of this referendum. Was it COVID?
No, it wasn't COVID, but I think you're right. That's what our Eurodollar University mission really is. It's looking at the monetary system so as to try to understand what it is that's causing various changes in the longer run rate of change in economic growth. Because as we realize, historically speaking, and there are any number of historical examples across all types of societies that show when economic growth over a prolonged period, when the rate of change goes down, the rate of political instability goes way, way up, which makes perfect sense. If the system stops working, people start rejecting that system and start looking for other ways of doing things. And what we talked about with Alison, what I really loved, I loved about our conversation with Alison Federka was stability. That's the thing that always keeps showing up with especially emerging markets that do it right, that seem to be making legitimate, sustainable progress, is because political and social stability go hand in hand with economic growth and economic stability. And Chile had been an example of stability for a very long period of time, going back at least 30 years to the end of the Pinochet dictatorship. The Chileans have been sort of an example of how to do it right, because they haven't succumbed to the periodic temptations to just start all over, like a blackboard, just erase everything and start from scratch. And what happened was given what's going on in the Chilean economy recently, which is not globally synchronized growth or the benefits of something like that, in September or October of 2019, the local governments in Santiago, the country's capital, decided we got to do something because we're hurting and everybody else is hurting. So we need to increase the subway fare price of only the rush hour trains by, I believe it was 30 pesos, which is about 4 cents and translated into American dollar terms. And what happened was, despite that modest increase, it resulted in an eruption of violence and demonstrations and deaths and all sorts of, political dissatisfaction boiling over into actual physical violence and lots of unrest across the entire country, not just in Santiago.
I remember the same thing happened in France with the yellow jacket protests. Now, I cannot pronounce French words, but, the shirt yellow, that's how they called it. And people said it was some tax raise. I think maybe it was a fuel, but it wasn't. And that's the point of that was the feather that broke the camel's back, the cherry on top of a decade 15 years long, well, I guess 10 years at that point, decade long weak economy. And so, what were the results of the election? It's something that we've talked about before, Jeff. The results were towards anything other than, if this is capitalism, then maybe we should try these guys over here. Who are these guys?
Yeah, it's an attitude that, look, we know what we've got now, and if what we've got now isn't working, and we know those crazy loons over on the far left or the far right, we know what they're talking about, and it's all craziness. But you know what? At some point, there's a magical point, or there's some kind of threshold there where you say, this just isn't working. Maybe we should start listening to the craziness, because at least there's a chance, even if it's a modest chance, there's a chance it could end up being something positive. It could get us out of our slump. And I think that's really the point here, is that the 30 peso subway fare hike really wasn't about a 30 peso subway fare. It was the Chilean economy had peaked, coinciding with most of the emerging markets, including Latin America, back in 2011, 12, and really 13. And since 2013, since the end of 2013, during the dollar's destructive rise during Eurodollar number 3, and then again in Eurodollar number 4, they have, not only has the Chilean growth collapsed, it has never come back. And so you start thinking about these things as if you're on the ground in Chile, thinking maybe this is a permanent condition. Maybe this is not just a temporary slump, a sharp, severe temporary slump. Maybe this is something that's going to change and alter the long-run trajectory in a very bad way. And because of that, and along with other factors as well, during Chile's period of prosperity between 1990 and 2013, the Chilean people, like the Chinese people, for example, they will tolerate a lot out of their government. So that's part of the inherent stability. Maybe there's a bit of corruption that you don't use that as a deal breaker in terms of, we need to start all over again. But as soon as economic growth, that tap gets turned off, suddenly you start focusing on even small cracks in the system and say, maybe this is something we need to take a more serious look at, because Chile, like a lot of countries across Latin America in particular, there's a lot of corruption involved too. And so you put all of these things together, and it just becomes a pressure cooker, where all of a sudden a 30 peso hike in a rush hour trains in Santiago unleashes nationwide violence and unrest. And it's because it's really about thinking ahead to how do we get out of this mess when the people who are in charge don't even admit that there is a mess.
It wasn't the tea tax in Boston 200 some years ago that set off revolution in the United States. Some sparks are bigger than others. The attack on Pearl Harbor, that set off United States entry. But I am certain any other little spark would have done the same. It was just the conditions were right for a revolution of some sort. That's what we're talking about. After you're whittled down your energy after such a long time, and you're being told everything is fine, a little spark comes along and it sets you off. And this graph that we're looking at here is from your article that you posted on the 21st of May at Alhambra Investments. It's called Chilling Global Wind Blowing Stronger, Chile in Chile. And you show South American emerging markets and how their GDP performed, but you also do the same one graph lower for Asian emerging markets. Jeff, before we continue, I want to also tell people that this is a two-parter. So not only that article that I just mentioned, but an essay at Real Clear Markets, which was also posted on the 21st. And that one is called We'll Continue Hearing About a Global Recovery That Isn't Real. Jeff,
the point here in the charts is that, look, there's a reason why Chile has been so stable. It has outperformed almost all of its peers. It really has had legitimate economic success. At least it had up until 2013. And then what we see, and again, you can understand what's going on the ground in Chile. Since 2013, that prior economic success hasn't been enough to keep Chile out of the same types of economic problems that have developed around the rest of the emerging market economy across the world. And that's where you start to think, okay, it's been 8 years now, 7, 8 years now, what do we have to lose? let's start thinking seriously about doing something radically different. Maybe not just different, but radically different, because we're not getting any answers. The economy isn't changed. And in many senses, people maybe not even know the economy is in such bad shape, because the commentary from especially central bank officials and economists never seems to match up with what's really going on in these places, even the statistics regarding those places. So it's a very difficult situation where people are forced into options that maybe they would never otherwise consider. And that's really the point. When you see something like Chile start to go hardcore in a different direction, that should set off warning bells in your head that here was an island of stability amidst all sorts of regular political chaos, a place that had done it right economically speaking, even monetarily speaking, and then all of a sudden things are going south in the South American hinterland very quickly.
Let me show you a graph that I had put together for a number of countries, including Chile, that compared the last 14 years to previous global depressions. So what we're looking at right now is real GDP per capita in Chile, and it's in US dollars. And what I did is I put each of the global depressions, as I think of them, over the last 100 years, and 150 years, and I said, okay, year zero is the year before the depression started. So 1872 for the 19th century's long depression, 1928 for the 20th century's Great Depression, 2006 for the silent depression of the 21st century. And here we see Chile, and we can compare how it's been doing now compared to those last two depressions. And what do we see? We see that the country is doing better than the Great Depression, but worse than the Long Depression. So it's in depressionary territory. And as you point out, Jeff, it's been worse lately, because for emerging markets, the 2008 to 2012 period was completely different than advanced economies. They had a recession and a recovery, and then they were off to the races again. But since 2013, it's been much worse. Let me read out a couple of numbers, Jeff. I can't help myself. Okay. Real GDP per capita in US dollars. So this is, it's serious, as harsh and as hard and as conservative an estimate I can think of here. Between 1951 and 2007, it compounded at 2% a year for Chile. Now, some people might say, those 2007 to 2007 period was total credit bubble. You can't compare that. Okay, 1951 to 2000, 1.9% compounded annual growth rate in real GDP per capita. Here's the punchline. 2008 to 2020, half. 0.9%. To your point that you always bring up, we live in a nonlinear world. That's not a negative number. It's a positive number. What are you complaining about, people in Chile? No, because you're used to, for 50 years, and then, as we're just saying, so you're at half that rate, and that rate only looks good because the 2008 to 2012 period was good. And so now, we didn't say the word yet, I don't believe. We have Communism. That's where they voted. It's who they voted for in the assembly, a large number of communists, and then the mayor of Santiago, lovely Santiago.
Yeah, the referendum was about seating. 155 seats were up for grab in this constitutional assembly, which is empowered to make radical changes to the Constitution with a 2/3 vote in that constitutional assembly. And it was widely expected that the ruling party, the party of the existing president of Chile, would do relatively well, at least get 2/3, or at least get 1/3, if not a little bit more, so that Chile wouldn't have, there wouldn't be the ability for other radical elements to radically redraw the constitutional limits. But as the actual election results came in, I think it's called the Chile Vamos party, fell well short of 1/3, and in fact, more than a supermajority of seats went to not just leftists but hardcore committed communists as well as an assortment of independents who are, variously linked to those same types of sympathies. So in this constitutional assembly that is empowered to redraw Chile's constitution as it sees fits with a 2/3 majority, will likely have a 2/3 majority influenced by what is a hardcore leftist, communist, socialist elements in that assembly.
Punta Arenas. That's where I went on my trip to Chile, and it's the southernmost airport in Chile, and it is just one more short flight, and you're in the south. You're in Antarctica, and I found it unsettling. I felt like I was at the end of the world. You look around, it's perfectly normal, but mentally, I knew I was at the end of the world, and it was a little bit unsettling. And I think what we could say here, if I could make an analogy, a tortured one, is that end stage capitalism. It's the end of capitalism, as we discussed. I think it was episode 15. Capitalism has had its run, as predicted by Marx. It's been 15 years now where no new wealth has been generated, and it's time to redistribute it. And people may think that we're overdoing it, but we've seen this, at least by my measure, since 2014, political upheaval in Europe, North America, South America, and it'll continue until we resolve this monetary shortage.
That's why we bring up Chile in the first place. It's another one of those things where you say, we are not overdoing it. We're not panicking here. What we're saying is this is an important signpost in trying to understand the progression of more extreme and radical political results because of this prolonged period of economic stagnation, silent depression, however you want to call the thing. What it is what we said. And Chile is a perfect example. If the rate of growth is half of what it used to be, that doesn't sound like much, right? It's just 1% less. No, that's a massive, tremendous amount of lost growth, especially over time, especially when you consider compounding and everything else like that. It puts the system so far behind, and it puts so much pressure, especially on the lowest rungs of the population. You could understand why they might say, that communism crap is crazy, but they seem to have a point. They have said for years that capitalism will eventually reach its end stage, and I got to tell you, it kind of looks like it here, and not just for a couple months or even a couple years. We've been at this, suffering under this lack of growth and the government telling us everything's fine for at least half a decade, if not completely a lot longer, going back to 2008 in some places. And so it sounds like maybe these communists do have something. I know they're crazy. I know it doesn't work and every place else has tried, but what do we have to lose at this point? And that's Chile is not the place where you would expect to find, at least before all this, it's not the place where you would expect to find this type of message resonating across such a wide swath of its population. And that's why we have to pay attention to it. Doesn't mean that everything's falling apart and the world is ending tomorrow, but it tells us that this message is resonating. And there's a reason it's resonating in so many places that have had closer experience with communism and socialism than we have here. So it's really one of those warning signs that you have to say, okay, we really should start paying attention to this, because it's not just a localized problem, nor is it a temporary problem.
It's not a localized problem. The data for Argentina and Brazil right next door is even worse. And I wonder what Allison would say if she was here to the idea that it's not really right or left. I think the people are looking for an alternative. And right now in Brazil, they have someone that's farther on the right, but it's not going very well. I bet you they're going to go hard the other direction. And in Argentina, it was the reverse. They went from someone who's considered technocratic and world order and on the right and pro-business back to the left that drove the country into a ditch in the early 2000s.
It's sort of like a seismograph, right?
Yes.
It's just up and that's the instability. The instability goes up when the rate of change in economic growth goes down. And I think you're exactly right. In Chile, I mean, if the socialists do rewrite the constitution in Chile, it's not going to solve anybody's problems. And so maybe a couple of years down the road, Chile says now we got to start all over again. And so They went from a stable, increasingly prosperous society with an outlook that was, hey, maybe we're not going to be just an emerging market anymore. We're going to be a developed market. That was the trajectory that they were on, and then all of a sudden, they can't keep everything straight, and it's one of those things you have to pay attention to.
Let us go back in time now. In part 3, we're going to talk about cryptocurrencies. That's not back in time, and how they're related to ghost money and a great bullion famine of the 15th century. And Jeff, one of the fears I have is that we're not going to follow the fourth turning timeline of generation-long cycles. One of my worst fears that this will be longer than a generation. And, well, what did you write about in your article? About a depression that lasted in Europe for about a century. A century. What else would we rather talk about? All right, let's turn there.
Maybe we should just end the episode now and skip part 3.
Well, how would people? No, people wouldn't want to go into their weekend happy. They would want to know in the back of their mind there's something that was as long as a century, and it was an economic depression.
But then,
right,
when we talk about this, though, it does have a hopeful. I want to say happy because we don't know that yet, but it does have a hopeful ending.
Yes, always.
So we'll get to the doom and gloom, and then we'll get to the good stuff.